Hello and welcome to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. My name is Natalie Himmelrich. Today I speak with Amy Watson, who has experienced a stillbirth and a miscarriage. She talks about pregnancy after loss, how she struggled, but also how she supported herself through the different losses. The interesting part in her story is how differently she experienced her two losses and how she managed those differences. Amy says,
I call it radical self-compassion, which means you love every part of you, including the grief, including the trauma, including the mess that it all is, because that's the reality of being a human, right? We go through these hard things, and even if we don't realize it, like we all have these ideas of what it's supposed to look like and how we're supposed to be. I mean, because that kind of covers it all. It's like an umbrella. Like if you're just really kind to yourself, because sometimes we think, well, if I just love myself when I want to lay in bed, I'll just lay in bed forever, right? I'll never get any better. But the opposite is true, because if you're kind and you just give yourself the space to maybe sleep in a little bit, you're probably going to process through and end up being able to get going if you want to, or maybe you lay in bed and you don't make it mean anything about you.
Amy Watson is a certified life and grief coach. She takes her own experiences with stillbirth, miscarriage and pregnancy after loss and combines them with proven techniques to help moms find themselves again after loss. She shares everything she knows to help you feel more peaceful, confident and hopeful on her podcast, Smooth Stones. Amy wants all lost parents to know that by making friends with grief, tapping into your own inner voice and learning to truly love yourself again, they will be able to have not just a life to be endured, but one that is full and beautiful. Amy is a sought-after podcast guest and she loves sharing her story, her babies, and hope everywhere she goes. We talk about the stillbirth of Lauren, how she explained Lauren's death to their siblings, the pregnancy after loss, and when she knew it was the right time, and whom to have on her support team. She's sharing the experience of miscarriage with River, followed by a complicated D&C with physical trauma, and the difference of grieving Lauren and River, how she managed grieving and keeping her faith, and she talks about radical self-compassion. Enjoy listening to today's podcast. So welcome, Amy. Thank you so much for taking your time to do this podcast with me. How are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing really well and I'm excited to talk to you.
So why don't we start with you telling us a little bit about your story of loss and trauma?
Yeah, I kind of always wanted to be a mom from a really young age. I just wanted to be a mom and have a big family, and I was able to kind of get what I wanted. And I had these 4 little girls, and we were pregnant with our 5th girl, and everything was going great. And we were just excited to have this house full of little girls. And right up until the end of my pregnancy, everything was perfect. Really boring kind of textbook, nothing we were worried about. But just a few days before her due date, we found out that she no longer had a heartbeat. It was one of those things where we were busy, we were nesting, my mom was in town, I was kind of like doing everything to get ready for this baby. And after a while, I just realized like I haven't felt her kick for a while, but we weren't really that worried because, you know, sometimes we've had babies that have been napping and we checked and everything was fine. So, you know, you kind of talk yourself out of what maybe is happening. But when we did get over to the doctor, they did confirm that she had passed away. So that was about 4 days before our due date, and we moved forward. I think it was a really small hospital and the medical staff was kind of in shock too. We were kind of in shock and had to, my husband had to go home and tell our girls what happened because the hospital kind of just walked me right back to labor and delivery. Like we didn't even, when I look back now, I think, why didn't I go home and, you know, take a minute and talk to my kids and pack a suitcase and, you know, whatever.
Takes some time.
Yeah, that's what happened is they just kind of walked me back to labor and delivery. My husband went home to talk to our children and my mom who was there. And then, you know, proceeded to give birth to our daughter. And I remember that being, I had been induced with 3 of my other deliveries. And so I kind of knew how it all worked to start labor, artificially or at the hospital. And so I just decided, okay, I know how to do this. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do everything I would do, normally, and really felt, I think, empowered in that and just saying, okay, I can do this for her, right? Like I can deliver her, I can handle this. But then, as you're there, people start coming and asking questions. And I just remember them, trying to figure out burial plots and what we were going to do. And I just thought, how am I planning a funeral during labor? How do you even do this? So that was kind of a lot. But then everyone left and we were just there alone and ended up having her in the middle of the night, just really quiet. And she was beautiful and perfect and had little chubby cheeks. And we got to spend some time with her and we named her Lauren. And the only thing they could say about what had happened was probably I had a partial placental abruption. And I had felt some contractions the night before, and I really thought, this is it. I'm going into labor. Looking back, that probably was some sort of cramping to do with the placenta. So we don't really know, but there was nothing wrong with her. Just was one of those things that, nobody really could have predicted happening. And yeah, so that kind of started my, I guess, grief journey. That was pretty devastating for me and our family and like all these little girls at home. I think they're like ages 9 down to 3.
Yeah.
And yeah, just lots of conversations but also a beautiful thing because I love that they were there and kind of got me out of bed every day and kept me going and kept life somewhat normal, even though it was not normal. But yeah, and we went on to get pregnant just a few months after that. And so I feel like that's a little bit, anybody who's been pregnant after a loss like that, where it's like a textbook pregnancy, everything's fine until the end, to be pregnant again and grieving is a lot to handle. I would say that year was the hardest year of my life. Just
one of the questions that I hear often from my clients is, when do I know that I'm ready again to be pregnant after a loss? And given that you just shared that you were pregnant quite a few months after that, how did you know that it's time again or it's right for you?
Yeah, it's funny you asked that because I actually wrote a whole little ebook to kind of help people decide this question because there isn't one right answer. And a lot of people are waiting to like feel ready, like that just happens out, like someday you'll just wake up and you'll feel ready. But in my experience, most people don't. That doesn't happen, right? It has to be a choice. And some people really have that urge and that drive to be pregnant again. And that's okay. Like sometimes I think we try to talk ourselves out of that and say, maybe I'm replacing my baby, or maybe I'm trying to distract myself from the grief, or all these reasons why you would talk yourself out of it. And I think, honor what you're feeling. And it might be biological. It might be your heart, your mind that just want a baby, and it's not a replacement. If that's a desire you have, then, I definitely recommend you have support and physically you're healthy and just mentally being healthy. And that you have a good team on your side, because it is a different experience for sure. And having a good team and being able to communicate with them is so important, because a lot of times you are just like going into every appointment is so scary. And so I think making sure you're at a place where you can voice your concerns and be able to ask questions and have tools to kind of navigate that part of it is so important. But for me personally, we had a whole nursery. Like we had a car seat in the car. We had everything. And like I said, we had always wanted this big family, and we had these, we just had this plan to have a baby. And that baby didn't get to stay. I kind of had said to the universe or God or however anybody defines it, I just was like, there's this out of control feeling. You just think, how can this happen? Like nothing's in my control. And so that's kind of what we did was we thought, oh, we lay these plans for our family and we think we have control, but we don't. So I was just like, well, then I'm not going to, we're not going to try, but we're not going to not try. And whatever happens, it happens. And that's kind of where I was. So yeah, I just think it's so different for everybody. And sometimes partners will not be on the same page of trying again. So that's something that I think you really need to, again, honor your partner's feelings, their fears, their desires, and, come together. And I think in our case, it was just, I really felt strongly about it. And even though we were afraid and a lot of different emotions, we just decided that, we would like to have more babies and we did. So yeah. And then we ended up going on. So after that little guy was born, that was a really, like I said, I was probably scared every minute of that entire pregnancy.
I wanted to ask you a question about that because I think that's something really important you said before about the team that you had on your side. Because pregnancy after loss, as you just described, is and can be quite triggering in every step of the way. Because as you said, even if you have a textbook pregnancy, you're looking out for things to go wrong or could go wrong. So who did you have on your team? Who was supportive for you?
I stayed with the same doctor, and some people really, that's a choice you have to make too. If you feel like you can't trust the doctor you had with your loss, it's okay to change. But also I felt like my doctor was the most invested person in this baby living, right? Because he had gone over and over and over what had happened and just really, he told me it was like one of the low points of his career. He had had 2 stillbirths. There was another one just a few months before ours in our little small town, so rare that it would happen to have 2 full-term stillbirths. And so I knew that he was going to do the best he could. And then we also were working with maternal fetal medicine and would go for extra appointments there and just making sure. And then I also did have a therapist at the time. And she was kind of helping with my mental health and just trying again to calm that nervous system that was just always on alert. And so just trying to do a lot of breathing exercises and focusing on different things. Yeah. And then just my family and a few friends. I always say quality, not quantity when you're looking for support. Because if you just have a couple of people that you can text and say, you know what, today is really, really hard. You just reminded me that we hid the pregnancy for the first 20 weeks.
Okay.
Because we didn't want to tell our we didn't want our kids to have to wait so long and be worried. And I'm lucky I'm tall. Somehow I could just wear sweaters and we were able to hide it the whole first half. And I did that just for I needed to focus my energy. I needed to just take care of it myself and not be dealing with other people's input. So, but I did have 2 or 3 really close friends. And they knew. I'm pretty sure I actually told one of them before my husband, maybe with one of our other rainbow pregnancies. But yeah, I had these friends that, they were there for me. And that was huge. So I think that's really, really important for everybody. And I hope that everybody has that or can find that, right? There's so many groups and people or professionals that you can reach out to and build your support team, even if it isn't the people you think it might be.
Yeah, I think that's a pivotal point. And I actually write in my first book, Grieving Parents, about the 2 different types of people showing up in our life. Hopefully the firefighters and the builders, and those who come very early on after the loss or the trauma, they are the firefighters, and those who come and help you build up, they are the builders. And so many people describe the secondary losses after a loss, which is the friends that are neither builders or firefighters. They might just not be able to fulfill any of those roles. And to deal with that fact that even if it's a good friend and they are just helpless in their own grief, that they can't be actually of support, and to actually deal with that. Did you have that as well? Some of those that you had to let go?
Yeah. And I found that wasn't a challenge for me. I think I was able to very naturally just know that everyone's doing their best. Like, I was able to keep most of my relationships intact just because I didn't have those expectations. And that's a lot of what I talk to my clients about. And I'm sure you do too. It's just those expectations or those ways you want people to behave when they're just not capable of it. I mean, that's what really will make those relationships hard. So I think just like I wanted people to understand that I was not functioning at my best when I was deep in grief and fear and all of these things, like I also try to extend that to other people to just understand, like whatever the quote is, like everyone is fighting all these battles that we can't see, and just assuming that everyone's doing their best. Because I did have a lot of people in my life that did not show up like at all. Some that didn't even say a word about what had happened, and that are very close people to me. And I just was like, yeah, they're just really not able to do that. And it's okay. I'm not going to let it ruin the relationship.
Not everyone is capable of letting that go. And some of those actually have to be let go of if that's really important. So that's fine too. So if anyone listening here, if that really is hurtful, if someone is close and isn't showing up, it's okay. And another podcast guest actually shared that we have to make sure that people care about their losses. Maybe they are not able to do much more but care, and maybe they're not even able to understand. But if they care in whatever way they can, show up and show that they care. So then you mentioned you had another child and a boy after those 4 girls. And do you want to continue there a bit?
Yeah. So we had this living little boy. It was beautiful. I mean, everything, even to when he was born and came out, and they put him on me, and he still was kind of purple, as baby newborns are. But I was just like, he's not breathing. Like, you have to take him and make sure he's breathing. And then he like peed on the nurses, and everything was, it was good. And it was really beautiful and healing having him in our family. And we just loved it, loved having him. And he's grown up to be, like, when you talk about trauma, he's grown up to be one of those wild little boys that just gives me lots of practice managing my fears and anxieties around his safety. So we'll put it that way. But we've already had our fair share of stitches and broken bones, and he's very independent, and he's everything's fast, and he's been just a lot of fun to get to raise. We also went on and had another loss after him. And that was a 14-week loss, and ended up having a DNC. And that baby we named River. We don't know the gender, but that was a tough situation. We chose to go in for surgery. And it was one of those things, just like on TV, like the doctor said, this will be quick. You'll be home in time for breakfast. And I woke up in the operating room looking up at the lights on the ceiling and them saying, Amy, you had a lot of bleeding during the surgery. We're going to take you to the hospital. And, took me down the hall out of the surgery center into the hospital, and found out that, I had basically immediately started hemorrhaging as soon as they started. And they had spent 90 minutes basically trying to not have me bleed out. And so I woke up, I was very weak and tired from the anesthesia and from the blood loss. They had given me some blood in surgery, but I don't think it wasn't enough. I had no blood pressure. And I was just sitting there, and I know that it was very scary for my husband, who was sitting there watching and feeling like he couldn't do anything. And there was just a whole cascade of, little, I don't want to say mistakes, but little things that happened that ended up, it just wasn't a good experience. We'll say that. But I did end up getting some more blood and getting, we're very religious. And so we had some people come and give me a blessing just to help me. And after that and the blood, I was able to kind of turn a corner. But after we went home, so I think we stayed overnight and we went home the next morning. I couldn't walk for about a week. I couldn't stand up just from all the blood loss. So that was pretty hard on top of, losing the baby. And they didn't really even there was no memory box. There's no pamphlet, nothing at all. And it was funny because I have been a volunteer and working in the baby loss space at that point for just years. And I had a little blanket and some tiny little hats that I make for a charity. And I brought those for my own baby, even knowing I wasn't going to be able to obviously see the baby or anything. Yeah, it was just really that hollow feeling of the loss. And we had just recently moved. We didn't have a huge support system where we were. It all just felt really difficult. And I think part of it was that, I had really hoped, all I wanted was for the baby to live. After you've lost a child, you're like, I don't care about anything else. I just want them to live and keep having a heartbeat and, be born alive. And when that didn't happen, that was really hard for me. The more losses you have every time, it's just, and I know there are people out there who have been through a lot more, just over and over recurrent loss. I think with Lauren, I was able to find a lot of peace and search for answers. And even though it was super devastating, I had a lot of peace around it. I wasn't angry, but with River, I was like, this is not fair. And then to have all these other things happen, I was like, I'm not okay with this. And so the grieving process was definitely different after that, just because there was such a physical component, just all kinds of things. Like I had to go get blood draws every week until it went down. My HCG went down to 0 because they want to make sure they got everything out. That went on for months where it just wasn't going all the way down to 0. And every time you go into the clinic, every time you have to get your blood drawn, every time I would cry. Luckily I had the same lady most of the time that took my blood, and she would just cry with me or hug me. And I didn't want to be there. That was really hard.
It's very interesting listening to you telling River's story in comparison to Lauren's story, because from getting the story, I can tell the difference. And from the sound of it, that River's situation and your situation seems to have been one thing happen, and you didn't want to say mistake or wrong, after another, but also the traumatic aspect of being in an environment of a procedure which is promised one thing and then it turns out to be completely different and has some long-standing repercussions afterwards. And also from the way they were expressing that also, and also the way your body was expressing that as to, I'm still pregnant. I do not want to just let go. This hasn't finished, or this hasn't been given a container.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it was different. And yeah, even when you say the word container, it makes me think of River, because so we decided to do the surgery because we wanted to get testing and we wanted to find answers and we wanted to know the gender. So I could pick a name and all the things that we wanted to do, and not just say, just be able to define this baby better, just because it was so early. And the lab ended up I will say they made a mistake. They didn't put the right code or whatever on the sample. And so they did not get to test the baby and find out. We didn't get any answers. We waited again a long time. I think it was another few months until my doctor called me and said, I hate to tell you this, but we don't know anything. And that was a big part of that experience, was that I had made that choice because I wanted answers. And then to have the baby just go off to some lab and then not get the answers. And then I didn't even think to ask, or they didn't offer. I don't know what happens after that. I mean, this is the truth of it, is I felt like I threw my baby in the garbage, that it just went out with medical waste. And with Lauren, we have a grave. And even a few months ago, my rainbow babies, we have another baby that was born after this loss. But he was like, we were visiting Lauren and he's just like, well, where's River's grave? And I just have to say, well, we don't have one, and talk to them in age appropriate way. But yeah, that whole situation of feeling like I didn't do my best to take care of my baby is something that was really, really hard for a really long time. Probably a few years. I kind of carried that. And I would say the grief was different. It was less, you can't really describe it. It was less devastating than the stillbirth. But I think just like the low level anger I had, again, it did kind of like my faith was a little bit more shaken. Like I still was very strong in my faith, but I was like, all I prayed for was for this baby to live. And what's the point of praying if like you don't get what you want, even though I know that you don't always get what you want. Yeah, I carried that for a really long time. And I think I had that blame and all of that until I did find, like I had found coaching, like the school I went to, it's called the Life Coach School. And I had found my life coach and she was like, I was working through some things and realizing, you know what, I do have a choice not to continue to carry this weight and not to continue to blame myself and to tell myself these really terrible things that I was saying and just believing that that's a fact. I didn't think to question it. I just was holding on to it. So I did eventually work with the sweetest lady who really helped me kind of pull out all the things I was telling myself that were so painful. And then she just told me, like, did you know you don't have to believe those things about yourself anymore if you don't want to? And I think because I had spent the time and because I was in the place where I was ready to say, yes, like I can let this go. I can forgive myself. I can, as much as I still kind of hate what happened, I can let go of that extra layer of pain. Because I think there's the pain. I call it clean pain and dirty pain. You've probably heard that before, but there's the pain of the loss and the grief. And then there's the pain where I was just being so hard on myself throughout this process. And I was ready to let go of that. So that was beautiful and very emotional and just one of those things which I love with technology, even over Zoom, to just feel so connected to her and to be able to just cry it out and, make that choice to just let that go. So even though this story sounds really dramatic and traumatic and awful, really I can say today that I have a lot of peace around it. I look forward to answers, in the next life. And I was always saying that River was a boy. It felt that way. But recently, again, that same little rainbow baby that was born after him, after River, he's like, I think River's a girl. And I was like, I bet you're right. You probably know. So who knows? But yeah. And then, yeah, that little guy, we had another. So we had the 4 girls, lost Lauren, had a little boy, lost River, and then had this other little boy. And his pregnancy ended up being very high risk. There's a whole story there. But yeah, I had preeclampsia. I was on hospital bed rest and ended up having him 5 weeks early. But we were really blessed, I think, that we had really good care. Again, the doctors said, like, we are not letting you have another stillbirth. We are with you all the way. I just chose to believe them. I was like, we're going to do this. And when he came out, we were so lucky. He didn't need to go in the NICU. He was perfectly healthy at exactly 5 pounds. And they found a blood clot on the back of the placenta, quite a large one, they said. And so I just really believe that the preeclampsia, everything we went through actually was the miracle, because I think the same thing that happened with Lauren might have happened, and we never know.
Yeah.
But I really do feel like the preeclampsia was the blessing, was the miracle, because he got to come out early and he's here and he's running around. And yeah, so those little guys are really special in our family, and we love having them.
And I guess what your story is highlighting, the different aspects of grief, loss, and trauma. and not that trauma has to necessarily be at the same place as loss. Like I often explain that trauma can also just be from a medical operation, or from a something that hasn't been well explained or well supported or actually followed through. And the different aspects of your story show that places where the support has been there, where people have actually given your nervous system the support it needed at that time, and where it hasn't. So what would you want other grievers or healers to know that would have greatly improved your journey in those places where it was hard or difficult?
Just being really, really, really compassionate with yourself. And I know, like, we say this, but it's actually a skill. Like, it has to be intentional. You have to catch yourself and just make the choice to be really kind, whatever it is. Like, if it's one of those days where you just don't want to get out of bed, if you notice yourself like snapping at your kids because really you're not angry, you're just sad, or you've got, a lot of things triggering you or whatever it is, just, I call it radical self-compassion, which means you love every part of you, including the grief, including the trauma, including the mess that it all is, because that's the reality of being a human, right? We go through these hard things, and even if we don't realize it, like, we all have these ideas of what it's supposed to look like and how we're supposed to be. I mean, because that kind of covers it all. It's like an umbrella of, like, if you're just really kind to yourself, because sometimes we think, well, if I just love myself when I want to lay in bed, I'll just lay in bed forever, right? I'll never get any better. But the opposite is true, because if you're kind and you just give yourself the space to maybe sleep in a little bit, you're probably going to process through and end up being able to get going if you want to, or maybe you lay in bed and you don't make it mean anything about you, right? You just are going to wake up tomorrow and do what you need to do. But I think just, being really kind to yourself. And I think if you're probably, as you hear in my story, like, I can be really hard on myself. And so that was like with Lauren's loss, I am a learner. I just went to books and I went to support, like, all these places to find out, how do you do this? How do you manage this kind of grief and this kind of loss? And I was able to just do it step by step and give myself lots of grace and lots of time and just be like, this was really hard, and it's okay that it's going to be hard for a while. And I think that's why it was like, I wasn't fighting it the whole time. Radical self-compassion.
What helped you practice or apply radical self-compassion to yourself? Was it your counselor or your therapist, or was it books, or what was it that, if someone listening here would want to practice that, what did help you?
I think that's a good question. Like I said, being really intentional and just, I think the more you learn about grief, the more you bring grief in, you understand, because I think a lot of people find that when they find people who have been through similar things and they're saying the same things, you give yourself permission. You're like, oh, that's kind of normal, or that's because of grief, or that's because of trauma that I'm feeling that way, or I'm thinking that way, or I'm reacting that way. Again, it's that aligning what's true in your life and recognizing that, it's okay to tell yourself you're doing a good job, even on the days that in your head, you're like, oh, that I'm such a mess. Just be like, I'm doing great. I've been through something really hard and I'm doing great. And it's okay to just love yourself in it. But you have to practice it for sure.
It's a daily practice, and especially in those places where it isn't easy. Like, it's nice to be self-compassionate if something is easier, but in those places where we want to be different. And when I remember in my situation or my story, there were times, even 18 months into my grief, I remember saying to my husband at the time, you have the possibility to leave me at any moment. I am stuck with myself. So I was so not self-compassionate at the moment with myself. I was so finding it so difficult to be in the new normal, because I was angry a lot of the time and I was just not liking myself. But it's that you're saying, it's a daily practice. And also, I think important for the listeners here to say that this is not a one-day job and not a thing that you do over a short period. That is self-care in its most intense. And self-care is not a luxury, it's a priority.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, I think, what keeps you going. Because even if there's days where you are just angry and mean to yourself, and like everything just seems off. It's okay. Like, can you love yourself in that? And I always say it, it's like your best friend. Like if your best friend comes to you and is like, oh my gosh, yesterday was, and they list all the things that went wrong. It's so easy to have compassion for her. Can you do that to yourself?
That I like. So to round this up here, before we go into the rapid fire question, what would you say? How has your loss and trauma shaped you, or what has your journey taught you?
I think that it has just deepened me, I guess. And I used to question myself a lot, or I didn't know how to help other people, or I would hold myself back because what if I do it wrong? And going through loss is just, I think, deepened that empathy. And I know a lot of people will feel that way. Like once you've been through it, you understand it. So I think it took, I feel like I was a pretty good person before and tried to be kind, tried to be compassionate, tried to serve. But since my loss 9 years ago, it's like a whole other level of desire to serve and to help and to support people, just really understanding. And unfortunately, you cannot learn that any other way. And we wish we could. And sometimes we judge the people that don't understand us or understand grief. But I think that's, again, just reality of being a human. Sometimes the only, you have to go through it and it's going to change you. But I've tried really hard to use that deepening and that change as a good thing in my life.
And I think the way you're describing your situation, how you went through the losses of Lauren and River, actually really showcases that. And thank you for sharing that so beautifully. So as you know, I finish the podcast always asking these 5 questions to each and every one of my guests. Shall we do that?
Yes.
And it's not something that needs a long answer. It's a short answer, something that comes fresh to your mind, or maybe you thought about it. So let's start.
Okay.
Grieving and trauma means?
That you're a human.
Healing means?
I think it means that you stop fighting reality and you stop fighting your emotions. Stop resisting the pain and just learn to live with it and to, like I said, bring it closer, get to know it. That's what healing means to me.
What I have learned about myself in the light of loss and trauma.
I love this question. I thought a lot about it, and I think what I learned was that the foundation I had set before I went through all of this really held me up. And I was just so grateful that it was there when I needed it, when I felt the most shaky, that I was proud of myself for having, that foundation.
And one thing you would wish people knew about loss and trauma?
That it is not a life sentence for misery.
I totally agree with you. Thank you for saying that. And the last one is one specific thing that has changed since my loss and trauma that I wouldn't want to miss.
100% the relationships I've made. There are just so many good people in the world, and I love that we can connect. I love that we're here, across an ocean, connecting together. And I have just made the most amazing friends and deepened relationships with other people in my life that wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have been through this and shared my story so much.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a real inspiring conversation to have with you, Amy. And any links that we've mentioned so far, and any links to the situations, not the situations, any of the resources that you've mentioned, we'll put in the show notes. So if anyone wants to go back and find out more about Amy, please also go and visit her on her Instagram. I really like the way that you support people through that. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to How to Deal with Grief and Trauma. If you'd like to be updated on future episodes, please subscribe to my newsletter on nataliehimmelrich.com. If you need grief support, please contact me for a 30 minutes free discovery session. How to Deal with Grief and Trauma is produced and edited by me, Natalie Himmelrich. To support this podcast, please rate, review, and subscribe to or follow the podcast on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you. And remember to keep breathing. I promise it will get easier.